delighted to participate in this debate, and I thank the Honourable Member for Newcastle upon Tyne North for her comprehensive exposition of the shocking issue of child poverty, which should be a cause of shame and embarrassment to all of us, that in 2021 across the UK some of our children are still going hungry. And it's clear that the current welfare system simply does not fulfil its avowed aim, which is to assist those who are able to work to re-enter the jobs market. It seems the route to achieving this has been woefully misunderstood. Otherwise, there would be no 5-week wait for support. There would be no advance payments forcing those who eventually receive universal credit and who are already on the breadline into paying back so-called advance payments, throwing claimants further into financial distress and consequently further away from the job market. No reputable lender would lend money to those living on welfare because they don't have sufficient means to repay. Yet the DWP is content to lend money to claimants in the full knowledge that repayment will cause even further financial distress and reduce the means to return to the job market. Why on earth would you design a system in this way? Now, Mr Chair, as a great admirer of Charles Dickens, it is worth remembering that he criticised the New Poor Law of 1834 as being unable to elevate the conditions of the poor, and was concerned that the law pushed the poor further into poverty while the rich became richer. It's all starting to sound very familiar. And in Dickens' times we had philanthropists and public donations to relieve hunger. Today we have replaced that with food banks. Even now in 2021, we know there are children in our communities who turn up to school hungry. We know that the poverty in which they live goes well beyond the material. Material poverty is the midwife to so many other privations our children suffer, as well as hunger. It brings with it poverty of self-esteem, poverty of opportunity, poverty of cultural experiences, poverty of family support, and poverty of potential. Children who grow up hungry, sadly, lose their innocence long before they should, and yet it seems to be the case that those with the power to address this are content in the belief that they are doing all they should to address this, as did those on the poor law boards during the 1800s. The logic seems to be that if you are poor, you could improve your poverty if you really, really try. And therefore, to some extent, your poverty is a choice. The only folk who could possibly believe this are those who have never gone without. For a variety of reasons, not everyone is able to dig themselves out of the pit of poverty. Sometimes the obstacles are simply too great. And of course, most children living in poverty live in homes where a parent is working. Now, to improve matters, we could fix elements of universal credit which trap families in poverty and keeps them out of work. We could replace advance payments, which are in reality loans provided to those with no possible way of repaying them without being driven into a pit of debt. We could replace these payments with loans that are not repayable. Or we could get rid of the 5-week wait so that claimants can be paid more quickly so they can look after their families. And we could do more to promote the real living wage instead of the current pretended living wage, which we currently have. Now, in Scotland, the SNP government is expanding free school breakfasts and lunches to every primary school pupil, and Best Start food payments across Scotland are increasing, and eligibility will increase by about 50% to all in receipt of universal credit. Alongside this, we have a UK government which scrapped targets to reduce child poverty. But in Scotland, we have ambitious targets to eradicate child poverty. The Scottish child payment of £10 per week per child for those on qualifying benefits will increase to £20 per week per child, assisting 450,000 children across Scotland. Meanwhile, the UK government refuses to commit retaining the £20 uplift in universal credit, scrapping targets to reduce child poverty whilst presiding over a rise in the same. Now, in Scotland, despite its limited powers, the government understands that with the Trussell Trust handing out a food parcel every 2.5 minutes, The status quo is not an option. Clearly more can be done and more should be done to tackle child poverty and hunger. Hungry children are robbed of the opportunity to be happy children and enscarred in ways that we cannot always see. And the Minister can forget trying to close the attainment gap if childhood hunger is not tackled. Hungry children's education suffers, their life chances suffer, their health outcomes suffer, even in later life, and their self-esteem suffers, and their ability to reach their potential and contribute all they could to their community suffers. The cost of hungry children is far more expensive to the state than the cost of feeding our children. The social cost is almost incalculable. And these UK government welfare policies are hard for Scotland to swallow, since they are served up to us on a plate by a government we have repeatedly rejected. Now, as someone, Mr Chair, who grew up herself in grinding poverty, I can testify personally to the ill effects it brings beyond what can be seen on the surface. In Scotland, real efforts have been made by the Scottish Government, with its limited powers, to tackle child poverty and child hunger. But the fact is that more can and should be done by this Government. 85% of welfare powers are reserved to Westminster. So I urge the Minister today to ensure that ways to tackle child poverty and child hunger that will actually improve the lives of children and their families are implemented as a priority. Otherwise, just as Dickens pointed out regarding the New Poor Law of 1834, the current system will not elevate the conditions of the poor, but will push people further into poverty while the rich become richer. And despite what anybody else might say, Mr Chair, these decisions are political decisions.